The same stream of life that runs through my veins night and day runs through the world and dances in rhythmic measures. It is the same life that shoots in joy through the dust of the earth in numberless blades of grass and breaks into tumultuous waves of leaves and flowers. It is the same life that is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death, in ebb and flow. I feel my limbs are made glorious by the touch of this world of life, and my pride is from the pulse of ages dancing in my blood this moment. How often, great earth, have I felt my being yearn to flow over you, sharing the happiness of each green blade that raises its signal banner in answer to the beckoning blue of the sky. I feel as if I belonged to you ages before I was born. Join in singing, if you're able, join in singing hymn number 40, The Morning Hangs a Signal.
You may be seated. Good morning. Can I have the young and young at heart come on down? All right, it looks like, there's Will. Hi, man. Thank you for representing. We're glad to have you, bud. Well, I thought that I would tell a story that's called an autobiography in 5 very short chapters. And I have to read it because this one I can't just make up on my own. I've tried multiple times. So chapter 1, I walk down the street and there's a hole in the sidewalk. It is a very deep hole. I fall in. I am helpless. It isn't my fault, and it takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in that sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. And it takes a very long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in that sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. I lost my place. It's a habit, but this time my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault, but I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in that sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. Sometimes we keep doing the same thing the same way and we keep getting the same answers. And sometimes it's hard to find new ways to do things and learn from our mistakes, but it can be done. So this week I want you to try to really listen to those around you and maybe find a different street sometimes to walk down. Please rise in body or in spirit for the lighting of our chalice. You ready, Will? You are in full control this week, Will. There's a lot of power here, man. Very careful. At times, our own light
Might as well remain standing as we're going to do the unison affirmation on the front cover. Say it with me, please. To outgrow the past, but not to extinguish it. To be progressive, but not raw. Free, but mad. Critical, but not sterile. Expectant, but not deluded. To be scientific, but not to live on formulas that cut us off from life. Hear, amidst clamor, the pure, deep tones of the Spirit. To seek the wisdom that liberates and a loyalty that consecrates. Turn both prosperity and adversity into servants of character. To master circumstances by the power of principle. And to conquer death by the splendor of loving trust. This is to peace. This is to invest the lowliest life with magnificence. You can be seated for the doxology, which is next. This doxology was written by Charles Little, who was a minister at this church in the early 1920s. And Judy, are we doxology? Did I do that right? See. Let me add my greetings this morning. My name is Dave Richardson. I'll be serving as the worship associate as a member of the worship arts team that helps with Sunday services. We are delighted to welcome back I must call him now our senior minister emeritus, because we have two minister emeriti. And so Ron will henceforth be known as the senior minister emeritus. Ron served our church as minister for 20 years, from 1976 to 1996, and has continued his service to us in so many ways. If you are a guest or a visitor this morning for the first or second or third time, we invite you to join us downstairs after the service in the common room for coffee and conversation. The common room's right below the sanctuary. It can be accessed through two different stairwells. If you wish guests and visitors to engage conversation or welcome conversation, we have blue coffee cups, dark blue, navy blue, I guess they are, coffee cups that are especially for that purpose. We should also note that guests and friends and visitors are always welcome to join in the many, many activities and during the week and in the post-service time. That, of course, is a welcome to all members, too. All of this information is in the order of service, in those inserts. I won't read all of those to you, but I did want to call attention to a couple things coming up this afternoon. At 11:45, the young adults discussion group will take place. At 2 o'clock, celestial and terrestrial vocal recital with our own Bill Tull will take place right here in the sanctuary. Also, we have a big event coming up this week, certainly a big event for several of our members. Several of our members will be traveling to Romania to visit our partner church in Transylvania. And Candle and Scott asked me to let you know that she will be downstairs. Candlin, are you here? Raise your hand. There she is back there. She'll be downstairs during coffee hour with little booklets. They're called Nebraska Field Notes that you can send notes to our sister church, members of the sister church. And she would encourage you to do that, and I'm sure they would welcome that kind of thing. I believe that's all the announcements. We have a justice pulpit that will be led by our board president, Maria Wallace.
I love our church. I love our Unitarian Universalist faith. But right now, I think we're facing the most difficult time that we ever have faced. Those of us who went to General Assembly last week came back super charged up, ready to talk about racism and white supremacy in our congregation, ready to save the world. Anytime you come back from Midwest Leadership School or GA, you're on that GA high and you want to fix everything right away. What we have ahead of us is a long path. In 2017, this was my first GA this year, but at the 2017 GA, there was kind of an uproar and an immediate increase of awareness about white supremacy and what we need to do as a UU faith. In 2017, there was a measurable difference. The program booklet contained 4 mentions of white supremacy, where in 2018, it became the main focus of GA, and there were 23 mentions in the program booklet, and hundreds of times by speakers throughout the week. Some of you are having a physical reaction right now to hearing the words white supremacy. And that is where you are in your journey. And I love you. As an institution, white supremacy pervades us. And there are so many things that we don't even realize are white supremacy because it's the water that we're swimming in. Do fish think that they're swimming in water, or do they think they're flying in the air above the crabs and turtles? What we need to do is stop questioning whether it's here, but start talking about what we're going to do about it. It was one of the examples I heard at GA that was really, I thought, a a stimulating example was when we introduce speakers, whether they're at the church or at an event, we introduce speakers by their academic qualifications. Oh, this is so-and-so, and they got their master's in here, and their bachelor's here, and their doctorate here. That's an example of white supremacy, saying that education defines you. Education is, who you are as a person. And there's so much that goes into attaining an education, from, living somewhere where you're advantaged enough to have great public schools, apply to colleges, have the money to apply to colleges, have being able to make a living wage after you get out of college to pay back your student loans. All of those factors, racism, white supremacy, affect those. So instead of introducing speakers by their academic qualifications, maybe we could make it about what they've achieved as a person, what are some of their other accomplishments. So that was one of the examples. I kept writing down examples at GA, but that one I thought was really interesting. One really important piece that I want to bring back to this congregation is the white supremacy teach-ins that were developed by people from the UUA. It was developed jointly with religious educators and members of BLUU, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. It was developed jointly by those people, and it's a way for white people to educate other white people. So you might hear time and time again that people of color are exhausted, advocates are exhausted of trying to teach us about racism. Well, this is a tool that we can use to empower ourselves to work on ourselves. We need to confront our own racism and work to change it. So in the meantime, how do we make this a safe space for people of color who are telling us that they do not feel like it's a safe space? Our being shocked that they don't feel like it's a safe space is an example of our privilege. We need to listen when people are saying they're not feeling safe. But how do we also make it a safe learning space for people who are on the end of having a physical reaction when they hear the words white supremacy, to the people who are saying that the way to call this out is to be vocal and prominent and public? How do we account for all ends of the learning spectrum? As a middle school teacher, I have never seen a child learn because they were yelled at, because they were publicly shamed and guilted. I don't think adult learners are going to learn that way either. So how do we love everyone? It kind of seems like an impossible task right now. And as one of your church leaders, it can be feel pretty downtrodden at the moment, but we're not going to stop. As I said in my letter on the flame this month, when it seems like an impossible task, a lot of people just want to give up, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to take every step that we can as individuals and as a church. We have this chasm in the Unitarian Universalist faith right now between people who expect it to be an open environment for all beliefs and intellectual discussion and debate, and kind of the Unitarian Universalism of old. And we have a young, vocal generation who wants to go about justice work completely differently, who says that if you are not also vocal, then you're part of the problem. It seems like there are a lot of catch-22s right now. But I want you to know that I love you. And I'm going to do my best to help lead us through the chasm. It's probably going to take decades, the way entrenched racism and white supremacy have been present for decades. There's not going to be an overnight solution. The board and the MTC only meet once a month. No matter how fast we change, It's going to be too fast for some and too slow for others. But like Kate Wigg said a few weeks ago, I want it all. I want a loving faith, and I want a loud vocal faith that stands up against oppression. Right now, I don't know how we're going to have all of that. But I want every single person to know that I need you, we need you, and we love you.
The offertory will now be taken. The Share the Plate beneficiary for this month is OTOC, Omaha Together, One Community. The change... What did we have more Justice Pulpit? Did I... I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought that was Maria's thing. Okay. My mistake. I didn't know this was me. Okay. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. So now the offertory will be received, and it is still going to Share the Plate going to OTOC, and our Change for Change recipients will be our neighborhood ministry team.
From Lauren Isley, paleontologist. Imagine for a moment that you have drunk from a magician's goblet. Reverse the irreversible stream of time. Go down the dark stairwell out of which the race has ascended. Find yourself at last on the bottommost step of time, slipping, sliding, wallowing by scale and fin, down into the muck and ooze out of which you arose. Pass by grunt and voiceless hissing below the tree ferns. Eyeless and earless, float in primal waters, sense sunlight you cannot see, and stretch absorbing tentacles toward the vague tastes that float in water. Still, in your formless shiftings, the you remains. The sliding particles, the juicers, the transformations are working in an exquisitely patterned rhythm, which has no other purpose than your preservation. You, the entity, the ambient being whose substance contains the unfathomable future. Even so, does every person come upwards from the waters of their birth.
Eric Chasen, astronomer. The philosophy that we are the products of cosmic evolution is not a new one. It may be as old as the first Homo sapiens who contemplated existence. But well into the last quarter of the 20th century, we can begin to identify conceptually and to test experimentally some of the subtle astrophysical and biological processes that enable us to recognize the cosmos as the ground and origin of our existence. It is very much an interdisciplinary approach, interweaving knowledge from virtually every subject a university can offer. It is a warmer and friendlier scenario now, many parts of which recently have become substantiated by experimental science. We are not independent entities, alien to Earth. Earth, in turn, is not adrift in a vacuum unrelated to the cosmos. The cosmos itself is no longer cold and hostile because it is our universe. It brought us forth, and it maintains our being. We are, in the very literal sense of the word, children of the universe.
From William Pollard, theologian, there may not be another place like the earth within 1,000 light years from us. The earth, with its vistas of breathtaking beauty, its azure seas, beaches, mighty mountains, and soft blanket of forest and steppe, is a veritable wonderland in the universe. It is a gem of rare and magic beauty, hung in a trackless space, filled with lethal radiations and accompanied in its journey by sister planets, which are dreadfully, viciously hot or dreadfully cold, arid, lifeless chunks of rock. Earth is choice, precious, and sacred beyond all comparison or measure.
Jacques Monod, biochemist. When one ponders on the tremendous journey of evolution over the past 3 billion years or so, the prodigious wealth of structures it has engendered, and the extraordinary effective teleonomic performances of living beings, from bacteria to man, one may well find oneself beginning to doubt again whether all this could conceivably be the product of an enormous lottery presided over by natural selection, blindly picking the rare winners from among numbers drawn at utter random. While one's convictions may be restored by a detailed review of the accumulated evidence that this conception alone is compatible with the facts, notably with molecular mechanics of replication, mutation, and translation, it affords no synthetic, intuitive, and immediate grasp of the vast sweep of evolution. The miracle stands explained. It does not strike us as any less miraculous. As Francois Mauriac wrote, what this professor says is far more incredible than what we poor Christians believe.
Once upon a time, a little boy came home from Sunday school, and his mother asked him, as mothers often do, "What did you learn in Sunday school today?" And the boy replied that the teacher told them a story of a great war from long ago. In that war, there were two great generals, General Moses and General Pharaoh. General Pharaoh had the superior forces and had the armies of General Moses in retreat. And using his superior number of tanks and artilleries, General Pharaoh eventually drove the armies of General Moses to the very edge of the Red Sea. With the forces of General Pharaoh blasting away in front of him and the Red Sea in back of him, General Moses had to make a bold move. So he called in his air force to provide cover for the Seabees as they built a bridge across the Red Sea. And when the bridge was completed, the army of General Moses retreated across the bridge, and his engineers blew up the bridge before the armies of General Pharaoh could cross it, and they were saved from defeat. When the boy ended his story, his mother was aghast. "Is that really what the teacher told you?" she asked. "No," the boy replied. "But if I told you what she really said, you never would have believed it." Well, what does that story have to do with my sermon this morning? Probably not much. Except that I'm going to tell you some stories that if they'd been told to your grandparents or great-grandparents, they probably never would have believed it. Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking both spent a lifetime working on what is called a unified field theory, or in popular parlance, a theory of everything. In a way, so have I. And this morning I want to talk about my unified field theory, my theory of everything. In the waning years of my life, I am now working on a book with the tentative title, Oneness, Thoughts on a Humanistic Theology of Everything. And my remarks this morning will introduce that subject. In September at the AHA, and AHA stands for Atheists, Humanists, Agnostics, there's going to be a general discussion of it. But in the meantime, as I write, I need to realize that when it comes to questions of biology and evolution, I am a rank amateur. So perhaps one of you who is better educated in biology and evolution can read portions of my manuscript as it develops to make sure that my amateur ruminations are somewhat close to the mark, and if so, let me know. So with that thought in mind, let me begin again. Ever since I've been in Omaha, it's 42 years ago now, it has been a source of pride for me to have been one of Newton Mann's successors. The first minister in America, probably, to embrace Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution as found in The Origin of Species. That sermon was not given in Omaha, it was given in Cincinnati. The same year Origin of Species was published, a century and a half ago. In one of his sermons, Newton Mann said, "The universal worship is formless. It is the unspoken sentiment of the rapt and expectant soul, the feeling of awe and adoration, of dependence and gratitude from which no one escapes who is not blind to the deepest meaning of the world. He who best perceives the truth of things is ever the most devout." Newton Mann discovered something about the deepest meaning of the world, something about the truth of things in the theory of evolution. With that thought in mind, let me begin once again. In 1999, after my formal retirement as minister of First Unitarian Church, I had the opportunity to spend 4 months in New Zealand as visiting minister of the Unitarian Church in Auckland. And it was there that I discovered another preacher who, well over a century ago, embraced Darwin and his theory of evolution. That preacher's name was William Jelly, who became minister of the Auckland Church in 1900 and served it for something like more than half of a century. In 1909, William Jelly preached a series of sermons with the title, The Modern Genesis. It moved me. In The Modern Genesis, Jelly wrote, one of the great problems of the present day for thoughtful minds is to reconcile the results of scientific discovery with the conception and practices of religion. Ever since Darwin's day, he went on, and the perfection of geology, astronomy, biology, and evolution, orthodoxy has been struggling to retain the exclusive and supernatural authority of scriptures against the insidious approach of a wider natural concept of revelation. And generation after generation, it has had to surrender one position after another in the conflict. Some would say that science, that a sense of wonder is killed by science, but for Jelly, it was increased as more and more nature became the Bible of religion. The Bible of nature, Jelly wrote more than a century ago, is a far larger book of revelation than the old Bible ever was. We have only exchanged a small book for an infinitely larger one, a book of the past for a book of the past, present, and future, a book of one race for a book of all humanity, nay, of all life and all creation. For what is nature? Nature, he goes on, is only a comprehensive name like God, meaning all things that are and ever have been and ever will be. The Bible of nature is the universe, which lies open in all directions for us to read if we have eyes to see. And just as I've had the privilege of seeing myself as a successor to Newton Man, I've been moved by realizing that I spoke from the very same pulpit Jelly spoke from more than a century earlier, and that he has helped me to formulate my theory of everything. What had inspired and enlightened Newton Man in America and William Jelly in New Zealand was the writings of a man whose family wanted him to become a minister, but became a scientific naturalist instead, Charles Darwin. Loren Eiseley, in his book, Darwin's Century, said of this momentous time, Charles Darwin saw a vision. It was one of the most tremendous insights a living being ever had. None of his forerunners had left such a message. None saw in a similar manner the whole vista of life with quite such a sweeping vision. Darwin expressed this vision in The Origin of Species. I can entertain no doubt, he wrote, after the most deliberate study and dispassionate judgment of which I am capable, that the view which most naturalists entertained and which I formerly entertained, namely, that each species has been independently created, is erroneous. I am fully convinced that species are not immutable, but that those belonging to what are called the same genera are lineal descendants of some other and generally extinct species, in the same manner that acknowledged varieties of any one species are the descendants of that species. As Charles Darwin developed that theory of evolution, he became more and more disillusioned about Western religion, about Christianity in particular. Disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, he wrote, but was at last complete. He sent this in a letter to a friend. The rate was so slow that I felt no distress and have never doubted even for a second that my conclusions were correct. I can hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true, for if so, the plain language of the text seems to show that the men who do not believe, and that would include my father, my brother, and almost all my best friends, will be everlastingly punished, and this is damnable doctrine. Damnable doctrine. That was the response to the theory of evolution as soon as it became public and well known. It was denounced in churches and by eminent Christian clergy all over the English-speaking world, and still is to this day. The theory of evolution, on one hand, has undercut major premises of the old religions, but it also has, on the other hand, added an immeasurable sense of wonder to the whole idea of creation. It is interesting to contemplate a tangled bank, Darwin wrote, clothed with many plants of different kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, and with worms crawling around through the deep earth, and to reflect that these elaborately constructed forms, so different from each other and dependent upon each other in so complex a manner, have all been produced by laws acting around us. And then he goes on, there is grandeur in this view of life, that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. There is grandeur in this view of life, as Darwin says, in this view of life which sees all of the wonderful creatures of creation evolving over eons of time, and recognizing that we are all part of this single, eternal, evolving process of creation. And that's the first element of my theory of everything. But the story does not end there. A lot of water has gone over the dam, as we say, in the time since Darwin and the time of Newton man and William Jelly. We now know a lot more about the complete process of evolution. There are two things in the 20th century which fit into my theory of everything. The beginning of an understanding of the second element can be dated to the middle of the 20th century, when two scientists who won a Nobel Prize for their efforts, Watson and Crick, discovered the double helix, along with other scientists as well, the double helix structure of the DNA molecule that carries the processes of organic development. And what we have learned is that the DNA structures that make one kind of species rather than another are all variations on a common theme. All living things share DNA. All living things have an intimate and eternal relationship. To get a brief insight into the tremendous import of such a perspective, consider that the mean variation between human beings anywhere and everywhere, is less than 0.2%. Or to put it the other way around, every human being is 99.8% more like every other human being than they are different. And one important conclusion that can be drawn from this is that race is an obsolete concept, a delusion that over the centuries has underwritten things like slavery, apartheid, discrimination, ethnic cleansing. There is only one race, the human race, and every human being is both unique with very slight differences in a universal spectrum that makes all of us brothers and sisters. I expect that all of us have heard that we share something like 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees. But I wonder how many of us have ever considered the implication of the fact that we share something like 90% of our DNA with cats, or something like 85% with mice, or something like 65% with chickens, or something like 60% with fruit flies. It was only a few weeks ago while working on this sermon that I thought to ask the question for the first time in my life, what about trees and other plants? And you know what I discovered? Apparently we share something like 40% of our DNA with rice and 60% of our DNA with banana trees. Now, I am aware that scientists that know a whole lot more about this than I do tell us we can make too much of these comparisons. That DNA is much more complicated than that. And I realize I'm only an amateur on this subject. But for my purposes, I think that such comparisons are both apt and important. DNA is DNA. And what this tells me is that there is an essential relatedness to all of life, animal and vegetable, flora and fauna on this planet. We have common ancestors and a common ancestor from the distant past. The next element of my theory of everything began to become clear to me in the middle part of the 20th century. I was in theological school. That was almost 60 years ago now, when I subscribed to a magazine with the audacious title, The Intellectual Digest. And in that magazine, I read an article by several Princeton astrophysicists. We now know enough about the makeup of the universe, the astrophysicist wrote, to say with certainty that the very elements which make up our bodies were created in the center of dying stars. Billions of years ago, billions of years before life formed on this planet, perhaps 14 or 15 billions of years ago, there was a grand explosion beyond human comprehension, a grand explosion that set in motion everything that is. And it is a wonderful story. In the beginning, there's pure energy and light so powerful it is beyond imagination. After a few moments and after a bit of cooling, the first particles of matter come into being. Those particles eventually form into atoms as the universe expands into a cloud of hydrogen. And in that cloud, galaxies formed by the billions. The latest estimate among the scientists, as far as I know, is that there are 1 trillion galaxies out there. And stars by trillions come into being. Eventually, some of those stars are surrounded by planets. And on at least one of those planets, Earth, life emerges. And relatively recently, in terms of cosmological time, human beings emerged. What a wonderful story that is. I think it's a wonderful story, but it's still not the whole story. After that grand explosion, and as the universe began to cool, there was time enough to create some elements, but not enough time to create other elements, the heavier elements that are the building blocks of life. That took giant stars whose super hot furnaces could create those heavier elements, and supernovas, explosions of those giant stars, which spewed those elements out into space. And it took a long journey through space for some of those elements to reach the Earth. And once they reached the Earth, however, the surface of the Earth may have been made up of material too light to hold them, and perhaps they sank into the depths of the Earth, where they could not be used to form life. And perhaps that took volcanic action to spew them back to the surface once again. And once on the surface, maybe they mixed with water, and the potential for the long evolution of life began. Out of the stars and up from the Earth, with the help of some volcanoes, have we come. This is certainly a powerful new genesis. And it is clear to me now that we are one with the universe, intimately related to that whole grand sequence of cosmic history. I once thought that there was a sense that my life began 3 or 4 billion years ago with the dawn of life on planet Earth, that my ancestors go back that far. But now I know it has much earlier origins that go back to the creation of the universe itself. And now I know that I am and you are children of the universe, stardust sprung to life. Finally, in my theory of everything, is the oneness of Earth. Out of the billions of years of the universe, out of this cauldron of creation, along with perhaps a trillion galaxies and umpteen trillions of stars, Earth, just the right distance from our star, the sun, with its peculiar characteristics, out of that Earth life emerged. We don't know if there are other life forms on other planets in the universe, although given the reality of cosmic evolution and the fact that there may be trillions of planets out there, it certainly seems likely that there is. But if there is, those life forms will have emerged out of the peculiar characteristics of the planet, of the particular planet on which they emerged, just as life on this planet has emerged out of the unique characteristics of this planet. As René Dubos puts it in Towards a Theology of Earth, the Earth is literally our mother, not only because we depend on her for nature and shelter, but even more because the human species has been shaped by the womb of evolution. And our salvation, he concludes, depends upon our ability to create what he calls a religion of nature. What Dubos calls a religion of nature, I think of as a theory of everything. We are both children of the earth and children of the universe. Out of those evolutionary processes, also brains emerged. The brains of other animals and the brains of human beings emerged. On my trip to Africa on a photo safari, I was amazed by the giant termite mounds which the termites construct and which are perfectly air conditioned. And you ask yourself, how can those people with tiny brains like that do it? But they did it because their brains evolved through processes of evolution that led to those abilities. Out of the human brain emerged everything that is human: the teachings of Jesus, the teachings of Gautama, the poetry of Walt Whitman, the idea of God, the caring thoughtfulness of Jimmy Carter, and the tedious egotism of Donald Trump. Everything there is about being human is part of that single unfolding process. It may be hard for many of you to think of Donald Trump as a brother, but what the hell. At the start of this sermon, I mentioned that both Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking spent a lifetime seeking a theory of everything. And so have I. Of course, they were scientists seeking a scientific theory. And I expect if they had found it, it would be so complicated I would never have understood it. But I think I do understand something about religion. So one can call my theory of everything a religious theory of everything or a philosophical theory of everything. But I prefer to think of it as a theological theory of everything. I'm aware that the actual definition of theology refers to, quote, the study of God. But as we pass through the 20th century and are now moving through the 21st century, God is become an extremely difficult word. It means so many different things that you almost have to ask somebody what they mean by it. And it no longer communicates. And I have become convinced that in this 21st century, theology needs to be redefined as the study of ultimate reality. And in that sense, my theory of everything deals with ultimate reality. And my theory of everything can be outlined in a few simple sentences, each centering on the word oneness. Here they are. One, there is a oneness to life on planet Earth. All living things on planet Earth, animal and vegetable, flora and fauna, have evolved from a single common source. All living things share certain elements of DNA and are therefore part of a single evolutionary process. Two, there is a oneness to human being. All human beings are members of one species. There's only one race, the human race. Every human being is both unique, but with slight variations of a single uniting theme. Three, there's a oneness to the universe. Everything in the universe, from stars to animals, from galaxies to trees, from people to ideas, are part of a single unfolding process of cosmic evolution. And four, there's a oneness to Earth. The Earth is our unique home. We and all living things emerged out of its unique characteristics. The universe created the elements which make up our bodies, and the Earth shaped our being. And when we die, we return to the Earth, and the elements that make up our bodies become part of the continual unfolding of life on Earth. And fifth, everything means everything. Join with me in singing Blue Boat Home. It is 1064 in this hymnal. turn to page number 530, and we're going to read this antiphonally across the aisles. I want you to speak to the people on the other side. And we'll start on my side, and I will lead that. And Dave will lead this side over here, and the alternate parts of the responsive reading are in italics. A little difficult to see, but we will start over here and speak to the people on the other side. Out of the stars in their flight, out of the dust of eternity, here have we come, stardust and sunlight mingling through time and through space. Time out of time, before time, in the vastness of earth, earth spun to serve the sun, earth, the thunder of mountains newborn, the boiling of seas. Mystery hidden in mystery, back through all time. Mystery rising from rocks in the storm and the sea. Ponder this thing in your heart. Ponder with awe. Out of the sea to the land, out of the shallows came ferns. Ponder this thing in your heart. Life up from sea, eyes to behold, throats to sing, mates to love. This is the wonder of time. This is the marvel of space. Out of the stars swung the earth. And read the last stanza in unison. This is the marvel of life, rising to see and to know. Out of your heart cry wonder, sing that we live. You may be seated.